Welcome to the first episode of our podcast, Chai Tea Nonsense. That's right, non like the bread, except for non bread, it's nonsense. Because I don't know. I guess before we begin, I think let's just talk about why we started that podcast, and you might get an overview of why we have the name that we currently
I
have.
know the diaspora, we all talk about like patriarchy, some people talk about caste, some people talk about Islamophobia, but I feel like no one talks about these things as like interconnected issues, all relating back to capital. So, and that's something we talk about a lot, like us too. So, I guess this is a way to just like put our conversations out there so people can know like what we're thinking and um like all the history that we talk about, um all of the theory behind caste, Hindutva, um patriarchy, all of that stuff. So we thought we'd share it with everyone and record ourselves just chit-chatting.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is like a very important reason for like why we decided to do this. In case
And
if you weren't aware of a lot of these terms or you might have heard of them before, don't worry.
yeah,
One of
we'll
the
get into
yeah,
all of it.
yeah, we're gonna go in deep. Yeah. Um I think especially around issues like caste, there are several people both in South Asia and in the diaspora who have been working and organizing around a lot of these issues. Um, and I think we both wanted to begin talking or like begin this by talking about our own positionalities in terms of caste and religion and social status, and we want to like try and bring a lot of these conversations into our own spaces that a lot of us end up occupying. And we're both caste privileged
Yes.
Hindus.
Okay, I would say I'm more
Yeah.
spiritual rather than Hindu.
Yeah,
I think that's
honestly,
something
we
both
should
of
get
us
into that
can
later.
agree on.
But yeah, I think I was raised Hindu, of course. I am still spiritual. Um, but my spirituality comes from a lot of different sources.
Yeah, yeah, like different
Yeah,
religions, different beliefs. Um,
yeah.
is there anything about yourself that you want the viewers to know or the listeners?
um, what else? Yeah, I mean, what do you want the
I
listeners
want to
to know about
say,
yourself?
I want to say that first and foremost, I'm a hater, but that comes from a place of a lot of, or it comes from a place of love. And I think that's the most important thing. That's all. That's all y'all need to know about me.
Yeah. I like to think I'm a bit less of a hater. But I think a lot of what I've seen, or yeah, but a lot of um my politics do ultimately stem from love and a desire to build a better world, where
hmm
everybody is treated well, you know. Um, and a lot of that comes from this politics of, or yeah, of wanting to spread love everywhere, rather than like being guilty about where we came from. And I think that's a very common trap that we can fall into, like given our
Yeah.
backgrounds. And I don't know, like a lot of leftist discourse, at least on social media, is like super toxic. And
Yeah,
I
for
think what
sure.
we really want to focus on is like playing the long game, you know. We really need to introduce things, or like yeah, introduce a lot of issues um through the lens of our experiences, you know. We don't want to like say, oh, um read this obscure theory from like 50 years ago that nobody cites. I mean, like, yes, we do encourage that. I
Yeah.
think we're still trying to get better at that ourselves, but I think we really want to play to our lived experiences and talk about how like caste and capital are really at the root of both of those, because like at the end of the day, all of these problems you mentioned, like patriarchy, Islamophobia, um colonialism, a lot of them have to do with two things, either Brahmanism or capitalism, and in a lot of cases today, both.
I also think that like we I mean obviously we talk a lot, but then also like on social media we're kind of in our like little leftist echo chamber. And then like when I talk to my friends, like my other friends from high school or college or family friend circles, like these ideas that we just know and discuss and are comfortable with all the time, like they are really not out there in the public consciousness. I feel like this podcast is a good way to like get those out there and have like eventually all these ideas of like anti-caste, um, anti-Hindutva. It's like just a good way to get all these things out there. And hopefully after we all develop the public consciousness, then we can try to do something about it on the ground. But I think we can get into our topic for today.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so today's topic is going to be about the Ayodhya temple and the Babri Masjid. And I think first we can go through like a history of like the whole conflict. Um and then we can like talk about like what's going on today. The Ayodhya temple was recently constructed in January, and I know like both of us woke up and saw everyone's Instagram stories and we were both like collectively shocked. I felt so gaslit. Like I don't know about you, but I was like, did we all just like forget the history behind all of this and like the violence? I was so shocked. I was so sad.
No, like weirdly enough, even right now, I'm like, if there's like some South Asian page, specifically like a page run by like somebody who's probably a caste privilege Hindu, I like go and see if they'd posted anything around the time that the temple had
Oh
been
yeah, yeah.
inaugurated, I guess, a couple weeks back, just to see where people really stand. Um like I think we're giving people a lot of charity when they're like, oh, this is like for thousands of years we couldn't practice our religion. Now we can. And I'm like, excuse you?
Yeah, that's like a personal problem.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely worth knowing a lot about the history and why things got the way they were, um, to really understand what our reactions were and to see why so many people in our lives were really crawling out of the woodwork.
Yeah, exposing their true selves. I was so disappointed. But for some context, on the site of the current Ayodhya temple, there was a mosque. Um, and in 1992, a bunch of right-wing Hindus basically stormed up to the mosque and bombed it and demolished it. And that led to riots all across India. 2,000 people died. Reports say that most of these people were Muslim. So that this temple was really built on a lot of like bloodshed. I mean, a lot of us like weren't born, like weren't even alive in 1992, so I don't know if like a lot of people didn't know what happened or like if a lot of people just didn't care what happened or like if a lot of people were like, "Ah, well, there's no mosque there anyway, right? So like it's fine if they just build a temple." So I've seen like people in like all three categories, but yeah, this is why I think it's like necessary to do like a history deep dive.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, like if you look at India right now, on the rise of like the right-wing Hindu government in India, these ideas of Hindus, honestly, Hindu fascism, that's what I'm gonna call it. Like that's the only thing you can call it. Again, something we'll get into later. Like these, I like literally when all you need to know when I say right-wing Hinduism or Hindu fascism is that it was literally inspired by early fascist movements in Nazi Germany and
Yup.
Italy.
Yup.
So while this was happening in World War II, some people in India who were like Hindus were saying that, oh, Hindus should be inspired by these movements. And for several decades, they were like trying to gain power, and they slowly gained power as India became independent. And ultimately, though, it was the destruction of this mosque in 1992, the Babri Masjid, that really set the rise to power in motion for the Hindu right wing in India, going back to the creation or yeah, the establishment of the temple today, 30 years later. Oh my gosh, 30 years later. This is the result of India basically going from this secular democracy, so to speak. I mean, we'll also talk about to what extent that's true, but like this really marks the
Yeah.
official beginning of India's, or yeah, the official end of India's transition from this so-called secular republic to honestly like a Hindu theocracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are big words there, but yeah.
Um, but yeah, okay, let's get into some history. Um, we'll start from the beginning and we'll go through everything that happened. So, the Babri Masjid, in English, it's called the Mosque of Babur, was built in 1528 by Mir Baki. So, Mir Baki was a commander under the Mughal Emperor Babur, and Babur was the first Mughal emperor of India. He was born outside of India, and he was the first Mughal emperor. And Humir Baqi was a commander in the Mughal army, and he was like, Babur, you're amazing. We're gonna build you this mosque called the Babri Masjid. So this was in 1528. I mean, y'all can see pictures of it. There's that like painting by that like British dude, which looks so beautiful. But yeah, stunning Mughal architecture. Um, whatever, whatever.
So notice how Mughal sounds like Mongol.
Mm-hmm.
That's somewhat maybe not completely accurate, but this tells us like the origins of the Mughal Empire, which was in Central Asia and countries like Uzbekistan. That's where like a lot of the kings like Babur were originally living in. And so there were a lot of dynasties that were fighting over there, and Babur eventually went to India because he heard about all of the riches that were over there, and he actually wanted to go back to Central Asia. It was only when his grandson came to power, the Emperor Akbar, and you might have heard of him as like Akbar the Great. Akbar
Jodha
literally
Akbar, the Bollywood movie.
It's a great movie. But
We should do a Bollywood focused episode.
oh my gosh, that would be
It would
amazing.
be so fun. Okay, but continue.
But yeah, so well, yeah, like towards the end of the episode, we're gonna get into like how maybe the conquest by the Mughals was different from British rule. But what's important to know is that like the Mughals themselves were very much an an Indian or an Indianized um group of rulers. Like they would not have
Exactly.
gained the support, or like they would not have ruled in India if the people living there didn't support them. And yeah, like you see a lot of like Hindu royal families marrying into the Mughal lineage. Also like the word Mughal in English that comes from Mughal but
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
yeah, it's used to describe like a really rich person, and
Yeah.
the empire was very rich. And but yeah, the point being was that the Mughal Empire was at this time like an invading force, and they built the mosque to commemorate like some victories over local kings. And also, I guess the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that like when a lot of people bring up India's history, especially in medieval times where you had a lot of Muslim rulers, it seemed to be like the native Hindu kings versus like invading Muslims from like Central Asia or Persia or
Yeah.
Arabia or actually yeah, they were ethnically Turks, remember that. So the Mughals were like ethnically Turks, and
Mhm.
they adopted Persian culture. So we actually don't have that much of a connection to like the Arabian Peninsula, at least culturally. Um, and yeah, like when the Mughals invaded India, there were both warring Hindu and Muslim kingdoms. And that's yeah, like that's important to know. And a lot of the Muslim kingdoms weren't just invaders from these places like Afghanistan. A lot
Yeah,
of
because
people, yeah.
because the first place where Islam came to India was in Kerala. It wasn't like even through the Mughals. Like it's like a huge Hindu fascist talking point that like, oh, the Mughals and the British were outsiders who conquered India. But then like that's obviously like not true because the Mughals like it wasn't really like a settler colony. Like wealth wasn't being taken out of the country, right?
Yeah, no, like that's the key difference. But
Yeah. So we'll get back to the story. So Tulsidas started writing the Ramcharitmanas in 1631, which is a little after the mosque was built. And Tulsidas, he lived under Akbar, the Mughal emperor, and he was definitely considered Tulsidas was definitely considered like Akbar's contemporary. So this part is actually kind of cool because Tulsidas like literally visited Ayodhya and while he was writing the Ramcharitmanas, and there's still like no reference in his book that Rama was like born there, where Babri stood. Yeah, there's still like no reference in his work that Rama was born there. And I think it's also interesting to note that like before Tulsidas, there weren't too many Rama temples anywhere in India because the Ramayana, like Valmiki's Ramayana, the OG Ramayana, was composed in Sanskrit, and very few people at that time could like read or speak Sanskrit. So Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas kind of translated that Sanskrit into local North Indian languages. And after he wrote that, after he wrote his version of the Ramayana, it definitely increased the popularity of Rama. And most temples in North India were constructed after the 16th century, meaning that like Rama only became like a popular figure in like these local religions after the 16th century. So I thought that was really interesting, which means like nobody cared about all this controversy until the RSS came in and started using this as a political tool, you know? And like, I mean, Tulsidas's Ramayana is like one of the most revered ones, like aside from the OG Valmiki ones. So it's like kind of like this whole temple is built to celebrate Rama, but like the oldest, like one of the oldest, most revered versions of the Ramayana that we all listen to was literally written when the Babri Masjid was still standing, which I think is crazy.
yeah. But there's this interesting like dimension where we're sort of like historicizing gods like Ram.
Yeah, and
Yeah, like
I feel
this
like
is like one spot where God was born.
yeah, I feel like I mean, as like spiritual people, I guess, Like, I feel like it doesn't really matter if these stories are true or not. Like, what's more important are like the lessons or whatever. Historicizing like Hindu mythology is another like a huge thing that the Hindu fascists have been doing for decades. So let's continue with our story. Tulsidas wrote his Ramcharitmanas in the 1600s. Then in the 1800s, India was under British rule, and obviously, like one of the tactics that the British used to conquer India was like divide and conquer, like start conflicts between different groups of people so they weren't united to like fight colonialism. So in the 1800s, the British actually did promote a rumor that the Babri Masjid was built over a Rama temple. So, I mean, I'm sure they didn't start that rumor. They just added like hella fuel to the fire.
Yeah, so with a lot of things in the subcontinent
Yeah.
that the British did. Yeah.
So there have been a lot of like archaeological digs at Ayodhya. So there are four big ones which I'll go through in our timeline. So the first archaeological study was conducted under British rule in from 1861 to 1865 by A.E. Cunningham, or I guess like British people would say Cunningham. Very sorry, I'm very entertained by that. So basically Cunningham was like he inspected the place. He did like a bunch of really deep digs in Ayodhya and he revealed a lot of like Buddhist artifacts underneath Ayodhya. And he indicated that underneath Ayodhya could have been the Buddhist city of Saket. That was his like main finding. And there's like a PDF of his report which we'll put in the description below. So a little like detail in that report was that like Ayodhya was I mean he claims from his like archaeological evidence. He claims that Ayodhya was deserted after King Brihadbala died in the Mahabharata. So I guess in the Mahabharata there's this King Brihadbala, and after he died, Ayodhya was like deserted. And another king, Vikramaditya of Ujjain, created new temples in Ayodhya. And then some time later, when a Chinese scholar visited that same place in the 7th century, it was a Buddhist city called Saket, and it had several Buddhist monuments. So it seems to be that there were like multiple things on top of Ayodhya by the time the 7th century rolled around. So then we're still in the British rule in 1889, and another person does an archaeological dig called A.A. Führer, and he basically says the same thing as Cunningham. Like he agrees with the Buddhist city of Saket. He found more Buddhist artifacts, blah blah blah. So those two digs were conducted under British colonialism. So from the 1800s to the early 1900s, there were a bunch of like conflicts between Hindus and Muslims. Um, there's like obviously this rumor that a temple was there under the Babri Masjid gained traction. A lot of Hindus were saying that the Mughals destroyed a temple to create the masjid came up. And obviously from like the previous two archaeological digs that were done, that was purely just like a right-wing talking point. But all of this like fighting led to an event that happened in 1949. But basically a bunch of like right-wing Hindus broke into the mosque, put idols there, and they were like, "Oh, God made them randomly appear here, so this must be the site of the holy temple, whatever." And it was proven that somebody had put those idols there. So the government basically locked the mosque. They locked the Babri Masjid. So Muslims weren't able to pray there anymore. And I mean there was a court case about this, but yeah, the culmination was that the mosque was locked and no one could, pray inside that inner temple. So after 1949, we come to 1969, 1970. There is a third archaeological dig done by A.K. Narain from the Banaras Hindu University. And he basically agrees that there's like a strong Buddhist and Jain presence. So after him, there was the fourth archaeological study done. Um, I just want to say I think I deserve an archaeology degree after all my
Honestly,
research.
yeah, yeah, you
But
really do.
I also think that like Hindu fascists, they use like every aspect of material reality to like propagandize people. Like archaeology, economics, like law, science. They manipulate all these things to like create this narrative. And like you have to be an archaeologist, like you have to be a lawyer, you have to be like a scientist to like go through and nitpick what they say and be like, no, that's actually not true. But it's easy to be all those things when you can read. So I guess like literacy is important or whatever. Anyway, um,
Yeah, and like it's funny because at least in this case of archaeology, but also in those other areas you mentioned, like if the evidence points in their direction, like okay, yes, it's like evidence that Hindus are superior and like Hindus deserve something that's been taken from them. But if it isn't, then it's like either Western or Islamist or communist or yeah, they
yeah,
just do
it's like they're
anything
the
that they can to
victim.
discredit it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's either like they're the victim and they deserve extra compensation or they're better than everybody else. Like
Yeah,
both at the same time.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, so coming to the last bit of archaeology that happened in 1975 and 1976 by archaeologist B.B. Lal. So B.B. Lal is affiliated with the RSS, a paramilitary right-wing Hindu organization. And actually he led an archaeological study, B.B. Lal. But one of the archaeologists under him was Muslim, K.K. Muhammad. So like a lot of people when referring to this study say that it's like, oh, it's like the study done by Muslims or there was like a Muslim study done. But that's actually not true. Like there was only one Muslim on that team and the leader of that was Bibi Lal, who was an archaeologist affiliated with the RSS. So he led a study, but the results of the study were never fully published. So they claim to have found a terracotta statue of a Jain ascetic from the 14th century. And in a 1977 journal, he said that like the findings weren't really anything special because obviously like a Jain presence had already been detected by the other three archaeologists. So in this journal, he was like, like nothing new. And K.K. Muhammad, he was part of this archaeological dig, and he stated in a separate interview that there were remains of a temple on the western side of the masjid, but these results were never formally published. So basically, the point of this study in 1975 was that they found some Jain terracotta statues, and KK Mohammed said this one-off thing of a temple in an interview. So this happened in like the study happened in 1975, but the journal happened in 1977.
I mean, journals take hell long to get published. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's
If this
normal.
was done in 1975, then yeah, honestly, if it was published in 1977, that would be really good, especially for like the standards back then. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get to BBL's study later. He like switches up on us. But anyway, as of 1977, he says his archaeological dig in Ayodhya was like nothing special. So the 80s come around, it's 1984, the VHP, another right-wing Hindu organization, promotes the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, which is which basically means the birthplace of Rama, which is Ayodhya. So they're definitely promoting this idea was that Rama was born in Ayodhya and we need to like go back to Ayodhya, like take it back, create like temples to like worship Rama. I mean, obviously this was like the literal movement. I mean, like the literal meaning, but it was more to establish Hindu supremacy in that area.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was in 84. So in 86, the Faziabad district judge allows the inner courtyard of the masjid to be opened, and Hindus are now allowed to go worship those idols that they had placed there a couple years earlier. So 2 years after that court ruling, in 1986. BB Lal pops up again in 1988, and it's been 4 years since the Ram Janmabhoomi movement has been gaining traction in Hindu consciousness. So BB Lal pops up again in 1988, and he's like, guys, there are actually temples underneath the masjid. And like, he doesn't publish this in any official study. He puts this in an RSS journal, and he just like goes on this like spree of lectures, like propagating this. And it's been like what, like 10 years after, 9 years after his journal where he said like none of the stuff in the study mattered. And again, like people refer to BB Lal's study as like the study done by Muslims because there was like one Muslim guy in his like group of archaeologists. So that was in 1988. So 2 years after that, the VHP led a rally across India, and there were riots across India, and it's started in 1990 where people were going from city to city, and it would end in Ayodhya, basically promoting the Rama Janmabhoomi movement. Sorry, it's like not natural for me to say Ram because like growing up we say Rama because like I speak Telugu, so it's throwing me off a little bit. But
Hindu fascism is like a North Indian Hindu fascist movement, right? So like, of
yeah.
course they're gonna make you speak Hindi, not Hindi Urdu. They're the same language. I'm not gonna argue about this. Um, and then like they insist on it's so ironic because like they insist on speaking Hindi, but like every third or fourth word has like Persian origin.
Oh my God, did I send you? There was like one tweet that went around and it was like, don't use these words in Hindi because they're Urdu. You have to use these Sanskrit words instead. Did I send you that? So it was like, don't use admi or aurat. You have to use stri and purush. And it was like, don't use like mohabbat or ishq. You have to use like prem.
Yeah, yeah, I think you did. And
Wait, I
then
think about that all the time. But
yeah,
yeah, no, it's definitely like all the stuff is definitely very North Indian. But these ideas have seeped into South Indian public consciousness as well. I mean, granted, a lot of things surrounding caste were already like very present, but anyway, those are different episodes. Yeah, so it was basically a rally across India in 1990. Right-wing Hindus went to a bunch of different cities promoting the Rama Janmabhoomi movement, and it would culminate in Ayodhya. So the rally started in 1990. Riots broke out across the country. Um, at the end of the rally, when all the Hindu nationalists got to Ayodhya, they immediately went to the Babri Masjid and they started demolishing it. They were like, I think they put some like bombs inside well, the rally ended in 1992. So in 1992, all the nationalists ended up in Ayodhya. They went into the masjid, they put bombs inside, and they like demolished it completely. And I think like a good parallel to this, for like us Americans to understand, is like January 6th. Like January 6th had all these like right-wing white people like go up to the White House and like they vandalized it and stuff. And that's exactly the same type of vibe here. Like these right-wing Hindus just like storm up to the masjid and just like completely demolish it because they believe that that masjid was that the Mughals destroyed a Rama temple to build that specific masjid. So
yeah, like I'd say that it's definitely comparable in terms of like what it means to the right wing movement in the US versus like what it had done to the right wing movement in India, rather than like what particular structure or building or event they're trying to memorialize. And like you've seen what's happened to India, like if we don't get our shit together in the US, things are not gonna look good.
for sure, it's definitely like a different level of fascism over there. But yeah, so 1992, right-wing Hindus demolished the Babri Masjid. This sparked riots across the country. 2,000 people died. Reports say mostly Muslims. It was a really bad time. And a lot of the newspapers reported on this, saying it was like absolute tragedy. It would never happen again, like all this stuff. So at the time, people very much thought that this was a bad thing. Like at least liberals, like liberals at the time thought that this was a bad thing and it wasn't in like India's secular values. So, yeah, 1992. So since then there have been a lot more court cases regarding this. So, 2003 there was a report by the ASI, which is India's archaeological organization. So the 2003 ASI report says that there was an underlying structure underneath the masjid that was not Muslim in nature, most likely Buddhist, and this was in the 12th century. So there's no evidence as to why this 12th century Buddhist structure was destroyed. There's no records of it being destroyed to build the mosque. And this ASI report was quoted in India's Supreme Court judgment of 2019, which basically said the demolition was illegal, but the Hindus get the land. And then they were like, okay, the Muslims can build a couple small mosques nearby.
Yeah.
That was the outcome of that judgment, but it did clearly state that the underlying structure underneath the masjid was most likely Buddhist, and there's no evidence that the Mughals destroyed it to build the mosque.
Yeah, I really wonder what happened at that time because that was way before the Mughals were even in India. Like that was still when like that was still during Mongol times, honestly. Like
Yeah,
the Mughals were thing. There was this earlier Turkic Afghani dynasty called the Delhi Sultanate.
right,
But
right.
there's no evidence that the structure itself was destroyed, though, right? Like these two things existed in a similar time, but there's no evidence that like an earlier Muslim kingdom destroyed it, or even an earlier Hindu or Jain or Buddhist kingdom also could have destroyed it in a war. Like we just don't know that. And I think trying to get every single historical detail right is taking away from like the current realities.
No, yeah, I mean, we'll get into that after we finish up this timeline. I forgot one small detail actually. BB Lal, the RSS affiliated archaeologist, he submitted a 7-page preliminary report to the ASI in 1989, mentioning the discovery of temple pillar bases in the Babri Masjid, indicating that there was a Hindu temple underneath the masjid. But this is just a 7-page preliminary report. He never submitted a final report to the ASI. So a lot of like whenever people say like, oh, the Muslim study showed that there was a Hindu mosque, a Hindu temple underneath, like that was never in an official ASI report. It was only like an introduction preliminary report. And the main place where people take his findings from is from the RSS affiliated journal where he just like said that randomly. So 2019, Supreme Court basically said that the demolition was illegal and it shouldn't have happened, but I guess y'all can keep the land. And yeah, now there's a temple. And that's it. We're here in the present day. And people seem to have forgotten all of the violence that went into the making of this temple, all of the propaganda.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because I talked to a lot of people after I saw everyone posting in support of the temple, and everyone was just like, "Yeah, I support reconstruction of the temple." And it's like, first of all, there was no temple. Like that's just like an accepted fact. And it's crazy how like Hindu fascists have like put that myth into public consciousness and we all treat it as fact. But it's like literally not like there's no evidence of a Hindu temple underneath.
I think they're just like trying to like use facts to your advantage instead of like trying to tell the full story, I guess.
But I think like when talking to people arguing about was there a temple underneath, was there not, that's not the right frame of the argument, right? The correct frame was is supposed to be like we don't like it shouldn't matter if there was a temple underneath or not. Like all that stuff is like in the past. You can't go around in the modern day destroying like mosques. Like it was the 90s. You know? Like you can't just like go around like demolishing like whatever you want because of like some emperor, some whatever in like the 1600s.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Do you have any like what were your experiences like talking to people who supported the temple? Like,
Honestly, like I think a lot of people I knew like didn't care or like didn't understand the relevance. But yeah, I think like the fact about what was originally on the land doesn't matter compared to like what's being done
right.
in its name.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And what's weird though is that like they use all of these points to justify things. That like all of these Muslim countries treat minorities badly. So why don't Hindus deserve like a safe place for themselves?
Mind
And
you, it's not Hindus. It's like upper caste. It's like upper caste Hindus that are doing all this.
oh yeah, 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 for sure.
There was also that graphic circulating Instagram in support of the temple that like celebrated the construction of the temple as a victory of indigeneity over coloniality. And that was just so wrong in so many ways. Like made my brain hurt.
Disgusting.
I mean, we touched on why Muslim or like Mughals weren't colonizers earlier. It's like more traditionally an empire. But also like like most of us are not indigenous. Like upper castes are not indigenous to the land.
Yeah, yeah, like this is like the new strategy that people supported by Hindu fascists are trying to use. And like weirdly enough, it's come up in like other similar places. Like they try and use this quote unquote progressive sounding language of decolonization or indigenous or yeah, like a victory of indigenous people. Like that's just so wrong.
Yeah, they weaponize like indigeneity to mean basically whatever they want it to mean. Kind of switching topics. I did have a question for you. Like, I don't, have you been in conversations where like you tell people that when the Babri Masjid was demolished, right-wing Hindus basically just like killed all these Muslims in the ensuing riots? What was their reaction? Because I've been in a lot of conversations where I'm debating the existence of the Rama temple, and I'm like, well, the Babri Masjid demolition has literally caused a lot of Muslims to like lose their lives and stuff. And like people just don't care. I mean, again, it's like a bigger conversation. We can't really make other people care about other people. I guess it's like dehumanization. Like they just do not care at all about like how this is coming off to minorities or like the suffering that they'll face because like have you been in those types of conversations?
Uh, yeah, yeah. Like I honestly don't know what to say, and like,
No, same.
yeah, it also really depends on your relationship with those people. Like, are they worth reasoning with, or are they worth like, or like, it's not even worth it in the first place?
I mean, we could do so many episodes on Islamophobia within the diaspora, but a lot of us, a lot of like Indian American, Hindu Americans, like as jokes, they're like, "Oh, my parents would never let me marry a Muslim person." Like they say all that kind of stuff as jokes, but then like they never actually have any conversations like with their parents and their family about it. And very few people like actually engage with their family on Islamophobia or even in their own circles. I mean, obviously, this is one of the reasons why we named our podcast Chai Tea Nonsense, is because everyone talks about chai tea, but nobody actually wants to talk about legit problems within our diaspora circles.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. I I think I saw this tweet by this Dalit activist, Prachi Patankar. And she's like, yes, call out white people doing yoga, but like you should also call out right-wing Hinduism in your circles. Like you very much have the space to say both things, and I would say like you are obligated to call out like casteism and Hindu nationalism.
Yeah, and it was just really surprising to me to see a lot of other Indian Americans who say all this stuff about like anti-racism. Like they're very outspoken on misogyny and patriarchy, and like when it comes to like the temple, they're just like on board. And I don't know if it's because they don't know the history, or if it's because they know the history and don't care, or like I don't know. And I
Yeah.
thought that was like really sad.
I mean, this is the thing, and like I think this is like going back to the goal of our podcast. Like, if they don't know the history, this is really where we come in. And I think changing the narrative, especially for our generation, that's gonna be very key. Like we can honestly like do another episode on the rise of Hindu fascism and like organizations connected to it in the United States. But I think like among my friends who are Hindu, either they are totally with me, they're like against Hindu fascism, but they're like, what can I do? I'd say like that's the majority of people in my social circles. But
That's
yeah,
nice.
I don't know, maybe I've like thinned them out properly.
Yeah, like the day of the temple inauguration, everyone and their mothers were posting in support. And they weren't really people that I talked to on the daily, just like acquaintances. But I did respond to a lot of those stories being like, this is factually wrong. And I just kind of wanted to know what their thought process was. And a lot of these people all are older. They were alive in 1992.
That's like totally unreal, honestly.
I think also a lot of people are like, that land is free, so might as well just build the temple.
I mean, I used to be like that. Even when the Supreme Court ruling came out, I was just
Hmm.
like, okay, they might as well build a temple. They're giving land to like some organization for a mosque. But honestly, like the insistence on building this temple right where the mosque stood,
Yeah.
that is it's really more about the establishment of India as a Hindu state. Like they call
Right.
it a Hindu
Exactly.
Rashtra.
No, exactly.
Um, rather than like celebrating Hinduism. Like the state of Uttar Pradesh where Ayodhya is, it's that's where a lot of Hindu holy sites are. And if they
Hmm.
really cared, they would like do infrastructure things to improve like the state. And that would include making the holy cities like nicer places. And they could use that money for temples, they could use it for like other projects or whatever.
Yeah.
They could like they could build nicer temples now that India is richer. Somewhere else on like some unclaimed plot of land, but no, they had to do it on the spot that the Babri Masjid got
Yeah.
burnt down. And I think like one of the proposals that was going around, I learned about this recently, was to make the site of the Babri Masjid a memorial to religious violence in the subcontinent. And I think that's honestly the only worthwhile use of the
Hmm.
site.
Yeah. And now that the Babri Masjid is gone, they're in Ayodhya, they're eyeing two more mosques in Kashi and Mathura.
Like they were saying this shit in Times Square. Ayodhya
Yeah,
jhanki hai, Kashi Mathura baki hai.
yeah.
Ayodhya is just a preview. Kashi and Mathura are what's coming next. And also, like on that topic of people using like Arabic or Persian words, baki comes from like Persian, I think. It's crazy. Yeah, but and like both of these are also like both very holy cities in Hinduism where there are prominent mosques that people want to destroy.
Yeah.
So there's gonna be a lot more Ram temples. Um, a lot more mosques are gonna be destroyed, at least with the way things are going.
Yeah, and I think it's like I know it's really sad,
Yeah,
but
and even recently, I think they destroyed the 600-year-old mosque outside of Delhi.
wait, what? I did not know that happened.
Yeah, like this was pretty recent. I mean, it wasn't built on any Hindu religious site, but um, if they find a justification, they're gonna use it.
I mean, it all feels very sad and hopeless, but I'm glad like there are people that see everything for what it is, which is Hindu fascist propaganda and the dehumanization of Muslims, Christians, lower castes. And I think as long as there's enough of us, it won't be too bad.
Yeah, just to end like on a better note, I think this is like a good time for the diaspora to start playing a role in speaking up about these concerns because as India becomes more powerful, like you saw like Modi trying to visit Biden, and America wants a partner to fight China. Um, I don't know if like highlighting these human rights abuses is gonna do anything. Like Modi was banned from the US in 2002. The ban only got lifted because he was the prime minister and he had to visit the US. But the US is partnering with like Israel and Saudi Arabia, so I'm not too optimistic about human rights violations as like something to like put in front of the government. But yeah, I think what we can do is like mobilize a lot of this sentiment we've like built up around Islamophobia. I haven't like lost hope yet. Um, and that the what I wanted to say though is that Hindu fascists definitely gained their power as a result of the diaspora.
Oh
But
yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, like they've got a couple decades on us, but they will hopefully lose their power as a result of the diaspora and as a result of these connections that we're building across borders and religions and generations and castes.
You're so optimistic.
And you're a hater.
We've come full circle.
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, and we will see you guys very soon. I hope you guys had fun and learned a lot.
Yeah. Thanks for listening and see you in the next episode whenever we discuss it. All right. Yeah, like we've brought up so many ideas. I'm sure one will come out in the near future.
Yes. Okay, bye.
Bye bye.